That's really separates me from most of these other bloviators. I bloviate, but you know, I bloviate about stuff I've seen. They bloviate about stuff that they haven't.
Is that really the case? Simple question. Last night, Mother Jones Magazine questioned whether Bill O'Reilly has a, quote, Brian Williams problem when it comes to his days covering the war in the 80s, particularly the Falklands War. The magazine claims O'Reilly said he was actually in the Falkland Islands, that he was actually experiencing the war, and he was not. O'Reilly says he never said he was on the islands, rather that he covered the story from Buenos Aires. So who can we talk about this with the right people? That's who. Daniel Schulman, the senior editor of Mother Jones, and of course, Brian Stelter, our CNN senior media correspondent, a host of reliable sources. You think you've got this?
Do we think we have the story?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He didn't say Falklands in general. I'm going to play the opposition on this one. He didn't say I was at the Falklands situation. Context doesn't say
the story really speaks for itself. He's claimed to have been in a combat zone, in a war zone during the Falklands conflict. The only place combat took place during that war was in the remote Falkland Islands, which were 1,200 miles from Buenos Aires, where Bill O'Reilly and the rest of the press corps is. The combat situation that he says he was involved in now actually was a very violent protest that took place after the war was over. Now, it was violent, but this was not a combat situation. Bill O'Reilly has also claimed that the Argentinian troops opened fire on civilians and killed many people. We could find no evidence that people were killed or that soldiers opened fire on civilians. So that's another aspect of this. And I'll tell you one more. He said that his colleagues at CBS at the time were cowering in their hotel and would not go out to cover this protest. Now, Bob Schieffer says that's not true.
No coward, by the way.
No coward. So there's a number of elements to this.
All right. Or is it puffery? He built it up a little bit too much. Big shots tend to do that, and you just hate Bill O'Reilly.
Absolutely not. It is puffery, though. Yes. I mean, I think he's, to some extent, inflating his experience covering wars. But the fact of the matter is that Bill O'Reilly has gone to dangerous places. He has gone to Iraq. He has gone to Afghanistan. He really doesn't need to embellish this stuff and suggest that perhaps he's been in firefights. And we've asked him about this. He said he's been shot at. He said he's been involved in covering firefights. He would not respond to our questions on that.
It's because he doesn't like you. Brian, let me ask you something, though. What do you think? I mean, that's the truth. He doesn't like what the outlet does. He thinks you're coming after him.
To 8 or 9 other outlets last night. Once your story went online, they purposely ignored Mother Jones, and then once the story came out, they went ahead and talked to a number of other outlets.
He's angry at you. He's not going to talk.
And they made it very personal. I think what's striking about O'Reilly's response is the anti-Brian Williams. Brian Williams apologized and went silent. O'Reilly started calling your colleague David Corn a gutter snipe, a piece of garbage, a liar, a left-wing assassin. So I think O'Reilly was talking a lot less about your allegations and a lot more about the personalities involved here. I'd still like to hear more from him about why he was saying the phrase combat situation.
Do you give him the pass if he's in Buenos Aires and says, I was covering the Falklands? Is that good enough, or do you wind up putting him into a different standard? And have we created a false standard with Brian Williams, let alone now with Bill O'Reilly?
I don't think we've created a false standard. I think we're so seeing all of a sudden more scrutiny, as should be applied to some of the most famous and important figures on television and in television news. O'Reilly could have said, I was at a violent protest. I've been in a violent situation. I've stared death in the face. He could have said all of that if all of that is the case. But by talking about a war zone, by talking about a combat situation, he does open himself up to scrutiny here.
The fact is he did cover the conflict, and so did the other reporters were there, but they didn't cast their experience as he did. And by the way, I had to look up what gutter snipe meant. I had no idea what that...
Well, bloviator isn't the best word to call himself either. I mean, that suggests a little bit of a integrity problem all by itself. But look, what this comes down to, and Brian's been with us from the beginning on this, he's been all over it. I'm worried about going after people for everything they say and how they say it. I think that it creates, like Brian Williams may be out of a job because of this. Do you think that that's a legitimate level of scrutiny to come after these guys in the Falklands, at the Falklands? He's been at other wars. He's done things. You know, how harsh do we get in these situations?
We're journalists, and it matters what we say and how we say them. We have to be as accurate as we can be. There's a lot of distrust
about... People have a tendency to pump up war experience. I don't like it. I'm always scared when I'm over there. But there's a currency of that in our business where, you know, it's like pumping up the macho. I think a lot of people do this.
But that's offensive to The guys that are out there, the Dexter Filkinses,
True.
the C.J. Chiverses, the James Foleys, those guys who are out there really putting everything
Got a lot of them
on,
at CNN.
Absolutely, who are putting everything on the line to bring back the story.
And there's the same men and women at Fox who do it at Fox News as well, war correspondents who are out there. With O'Reilly, it seems like this was a credential for him. You know, it was something he could cite to say he had experience. And he did, as you said, he has had experience in war zones and covering important conflicts over the years. But to go into that level of detail seems to have opened up to criticism. And by the way, you know, I think this is something that started with Brian Williams and doesn't end with Brian Williams. To your point, Chris, you know, groups like Media Matters, which have been targeting O'Reilly for years, are going to point out other examples of things they say that O'Reilly has also fibbed about over the years.
This matters more, though. When you say stuff about war, now that's the thing that caught me by surprise about Williams, is that when you lie about, I think the sensitivity of the troops and everything else winds up playing into it. But, you know, Brian Williams, NBC wound up taking him off the air. You think Fox does anything to O'Reilly?
I think Fox is a very different network than NBC. Fox is a network well, look at the response last night. They immediately put O'Reilly out on the phone with a bunch of reporters to attack this story. So they were on the offensive right away. I also think they knew this was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that was hidden in plain sight for a while. You all reached out to the other reporters in order to do the digging, in order to verify it. But people have, you know, thought for a while, well, let's put it this way. If you don't like Bill O'Reilly, you've believed for years that he's been puffing up his resume.
Low bar.
So I'm not sure this will change as many people's minds because Bill O'Reilly is a more polarizing figure.
Well, Daniel Schulman, thank you very much for coming on to defend the reporting.
pleasure.
Appreciate you having here from Mother Jones. Brian Stelter, you're part of the family. Always a pleasure. Well, we'll see what happens with this, John. You know, it could go a lot of different ways, could go no way, and you never want to wish anybody in the business ill, but we'll see how it plays out.